Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Living and Working in the UK, which tonight has a very interesting panel from alumni living and working in the UK. I guess you are all living in London, actually. I remind you that this is a series of different webinars every time in a different country. And this week is the launch of the International Career Days in Sciences Po. So we have the chance to have among us Gabrielle Deligelat, who is responsible for international career at Sciences Po Carrières, which is a center dedicated to career for students and young graduates. So I give the floor to Gabrielle. She will explain to you about their activities.
Yes, thank you so much, Camilla. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all connected tonight. Maybe just a word about Sciences Po Carrières. So as Camilla said, we are the central career services at Sciences Po. And our mission is to provide career guidance to Sciences Po students throughout their studies. So from the very first year of undergraduate studies, throughout their bachelor's and their master's, and up to 2 years post-graduation. Now, of course, Sciences Po Alumni also provides career guidance to alumni, right? So there is some overlap on those recent grads, so, over those next 2 years after graduation, but just so you know, we have two very different scopes there, and we mostly focus on students. So our team works alongside the Sciences Po's academic and administrative staff, and we also serve as a central contact for any employer wishing to recruit students and graduates for Sciences Po. So typically, for instance, if there are any alumni out there that would like to hire Sciences Po students, please reach out to us and not to Sciences Po alumni. And we also have a job board on which you can publish all of your different internship and entry-level job opportunities. We organize a number of events and workshops throughout the year. We also offer one-on-one appointments to our students and young grads. And we have also plenty of resources on our website for these populations. So if you're a student at Sciences Po or you're a recent grad, please have a look. I'm sure you'll find something that is of interest to you there. So we've teamed up with Sciences Po alumni for this International Careers Month, where we'll be organizing a number of webinars over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So each week we'll be focusing on a different continent. This week's focus will really be on Europe. So of course there's this session which Sciences Po alumni has organized on how to work and live in the UK, but we also have another session coming up tomorrow at 12:30 p.m., which is actually a hybrid session. So it's going to be live on site in the Neufchaise building, which all students know about, of course, but also recorded, and we'll be adding that recording to a website afterwards. And so this session will be on how to find a job after graduation as a non-EU national. So of course, as non-EU nationals, you need to obtain a visa to work in France. And so this will be a session that will be moderated by myself, but which will feature a specialist immigration lawyer who can answer all of your questions regarding this. And then on Wednesday, we have a how to find an internship in the UK and obtain a visa to intern there session, which we will be co-organizing with an internship sponsor organization called Bunak. So that session is at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. And then finally, we also have our European Internships Forum, which happens every year in Brussels, Belgium, so not in Paris, unfortunately. So you'll have to, if you haven't already, sign up and book your tickets as rapidly as possible. And so that is on Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then last but not least, we'll be organizing a few other thematic weeks during this International Careers Month. The Careers in Americas week will start on March 6th. So these are careers in North America and Latin America, and then we'll have a week dedicated to careers in Asia and Africa on March 15th. Okay, and so thank you for taking the time to listen to my intro. I tried to make it as short as possible. I'll now leave the floor to Camilla, so the International Affairs Manager at Sciences Po Alumni, who will go on to introduce the UK chapter and the speakers for today's round.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. I put all the info on the chat if you want to register to this very useful events. Now I introduce you to Linus Teros, who is a PhD researcher at King's College, and mostly importantly for us, is the president of the UK alumni chapter. So Linus, could you please introduce to our audience about the alumni chapter in the UK, and maybe present briefly the activities that you plan for the next weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. Yes, as some of you may or may not know, the UK alumni are, the Sciences Po alumni are organized in, if you're outside France, in local chapters, with London having one of the largest French populations outside of France, being a very important one and one of the largest local chapters that Sciences Po alumni has. We're around 2,000 people signed up on the platform, and we try to foster a sense of community. We meet once a month in a London members club, which is an experience of its own, for just to have a glass of wine and chat to each other, exchange experiences between all sorts of age cohorts. And then we also try to mount some activities outside of that world. Last year, we went to an art gallery together. We had a couple of book talks on contemporary issues, because as you all are being sciences-pistes, we all have strong opinions and are happy to go into debates. And usually these talks end up in a very enriching discussions. Yeah, that's what I want to share about the chapter. If you are going to the UK, please do sign up. Please join us. We'll be very happy to provide first social harbour for any of you who haven't been to London before, or who don't know anyone. I think it's a great starting point. On myself, as Camilla rightly said, I'm doing a PhD in Defence Studies at King's College London. If any one of you is interested in that, I'm happy to talk on this further when there's questions.
Thank you, Linus. And most importantly, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of Sciences Po in London last October at the French residence, and we have the chance to have among us in the public Damien Vial, who is the head of, he's attaché of university cooperation, and he was interested in our webinar. So thank you, Damien, for being with us. Now I will give the floor to Nathalie Lepenec, who graduated in 2021, and she's currently government affairs specialist at DS Smith. So could you please tell us why are you living in London? Why did you choose to go there? And yes, what are your impressions about living and working in London?
Of course. Thank you, Camilla. Maybe before introducing myself, I'd like to thanks Sciences Po alumni for inviting me. And also special thanks to Linus and to the Sciences Po alumni UK for doing an amazing job. I think it's been very useful to have a point of contact with other Sciences Po people when you get to London, to get to meet people. So yeah, they've been doing a fantastic job, and I just wanted to recognize that. So that was my short introduction. In terms of who I am and what I do, so I was a Sciences Po student before. I did the dual degree between UCL, which is University College of London, and Sciences Po. I was on the Poitiers campus. And then after that, so that was 4 years, I joined the School of Research in Paris, and I did a master's in political science and comparative politics. I specialized on the UK, and I specialized on gang violence and security policy. And completely unrelated to that is my current job. Well, it's somewhat related, but right now I am a government affairs specialist for a FTSE 100 company. So what I do basically is monitor policy that is being made in the UK and in the EU, and try to influence it. So it's very much a lobbying job, if you like. And my company is basically a packaging manufacturer and a recycler, providing fiber-based packaging. Is there anything else I can say? I think that's it for now. I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And now I give the floor to Sacha Nacouzi, who graduated from the bachelor in 2021 and in Sciences Po. And she is co-founder at Strand Simulation Group.
Thank you very much. So yes, I graduated in 2021 from Reims, and then I went to King's College London for my Master's in International Security, and my thesis was on Russian warfare in the Baltic Sea region. So what is Strand Simulation Group, or SSG? It's a wargaming company. So we design and then adjudicate conflict simulations based on many different scenarios, but as you can imagine, a lot of it being on possible conflicts, possible wars, but also the use of liminal warfare in certain regions. And we do this for a bunch of institutions, mainly militaries and governments, but we are currently designing something for a private company. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Sacha. And Thierry Seon, you graduated in 2011 and you are investment director at Via Outlets. Could you please introduce yourself and why did you go to London?
Sure. Well, thanks again. I will echo Natalie and I want to give a quick thank you to the Sciences Po alumni in the UK and to Linus as well. There is a big community of Sciences Po alumni in the UK, and I agree. When I came here, it was a great way to meet new people and to integrate into the city and have some connection. I met my other half at the Sciences Po alumni event, so another plus. So I represent from this panel, I guess, the private sector. So I work in real estate investor, developer, and operator of shopping center. And I graduated from the Master Stratégie Territoriale et Urbaine from Sciences Po. So all around developing city and urban policies, and hence my background and career in real estate after that. I worked in Paris first in JLL. It's a real estate advisory firm before coming to London. And also I wanted to say I did not did a dual degree between Sciences Po and London. I know there are a number of those, but even without this, I still wanted to come to London at some point, and it's still very possible to do so. Truth being told, it was probably easier a few years ago. Now with Brexit, that has changed things, and I think my fellow panelists here will probably be more helpful anything about visa things. But I know that a number of French or European nationals still do come to London, maybe less than before, but that's still very possible to find sponsorship or visa. And I see like a lot of young graduates, young people coming to London. At my firm as well, we're hiring European national quite frequently coming to London, so that's still very possible. About my role particularly, so I work so that's a real estate firm which interacts with municipalities, developers, constructors, trying to build or operate shopping center across Europe. So that really fits with my expertise originally in urban development and urban policy. Although nowadays I focus more on the financial aspects, how to secure fundings and project business plans. So on the operating side of shopping centers. That's for me for now, and I think probably better to find some general question for all of us.
Thank you, Thierry, and do not hesitate to start writing your questions in the chat while we discuss with our speakers. So yes, Brexit was a big shock for the UK. Have you been witnessing a change in terms of professional opportunities for Europeans, or since London is very international, is business as always? Do you have any particular impressions that you would like to share with us? Maybe we will start from Nathalie, and then we will go in alphabetical order.
Yes, so maybe respecting the Sciences Po tradition of having deux parties, deux sous-parties, I'll just do 2 parts to my answer. So the first one is, yes, it's probably a bit more tricky to work in the UK being an EU national, just because now you actually need to have a visa or a pre-settled status or some kind of allowance or papers that make you that enable you to work here. So in that sense, it is a bit more tricky. However, there is currently some kind of labor shortage. So a lot of companies in general are struggling to recruit. So I would say there's a lot of vacancies and a lot of open positions. So for me, I think it took me about, in total, from the day I started looking for work and the day I actually signed my contract, it took me a month. So that was really quick, I'd say. And overall, yeah, it was fairly okay to find a job with a Sciences Po degree. People tend to know Sciences Po as well, which is useful. Probably less than France though. So yeah, so it's always useful to explain what Sciences Po is if you have an interview.
Thank you. So did you obtain the visa quite easily?
So my case is it's a bit weird because actually I got the pre-settled status because I got paxed to a British resident. It was not on purpose, I have to say, to a British resident during COVID. When the borders were opening and shutting, we thought it would be wiser to have some kind of, formal relationship. So I got paxed to my partner, who is a British resident, and that opened the right for me to move to the UK. And I actually didn't know that. And I figured it out. And so I applied for pre-settled status, I think, in December 2021. And I got the status 6 months later. A bit less, probably 4 months later in April 2022. And I moved, shortly after.
Thank you for this useful information. What about you, Sacha?
A lot of Europeans left for various reasons. I don't think they felt it was quite the same afterwards. And then there was a mad dash to get an Irish passport afterwards. But there's plenty of opportunities, plenty of vacancies, as Natalie mentioned. I'm not quite sure what the logistics are when it comes to visas and how easy it is. But I do know that because France is still quite a close ally, people trust Sciences Po and they know Sciences Po. Donc I don't think it's a particularly important challenge, let's say.
Thank you, Sacha. And what about you, Linus?
Finding the unmute button is difficult. Well, I wanted to add maybe 2 observations. First being, I just wanted to underline there's still a very, especially in London, you don't feel in terms of societal pressures, it hasn't changed in the sense that you're no longer welcome. As sometimes European continental media has portrayed Britain to have turned into. It is still a very welcoming, very inclusive society, and you'll find it very comfortable to integrate in a metropolitan society, in particular here in London. The second observation is on where I'm currently working in higher education. Yes, there's a lot of change. Yes, there is a dramatic drop in European students, particularly on the undergraduate levels, but also in the postgraduate and PhD cohorts. And so that's affecting things quite a lot. Meanwhile, I think with our level of education, it is significantly easier to enter the UK job market, and I think that was one of the points in the chat I just saw. I'm not a visa expert, and I believe there's an extra call on this, but it's operating with a point system, and you have to have the sponsorship of a company in order to be granted a work visa. That being said, with people with a very good education, it's much easier to get that sponsorship in the current job market, as described by Natalie and Sacha, than it sometimes is.
Thank you, Linus, for this overview about the higher education. And what about the private sector, Thierry?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that as the reason to come to London, and I see here coming from Strasbourg, a lot of more involved in the public sector, but I'm sure a number would also be interested in the private sector, which is a very big sector in the UK. And the job market, that's one big difference maybe compared to France. It's a job market which is very fluid, very flexible, and also giving chance to more diverse profile. So in my case, I did come from a more urban policy background, but I was able to integrate into more financial aspect and financial firms. And this kind of move is very frequent, that any firm would give chance to any candidates, as long as it demonstrates some experience prior, or at least a lot of motivation. But it's not a prerequisite. I forgot my English. But if you haven't made the exact study in one specific field, you're still able to find opportunities in a field that interests you. And the second part is the job market itself, or the structure of the job market is also much more fluid, meaning it's easier for companies to fire as well people, but that means it's much more fluid, and people, companies and people do give a chance to candidates at all age and all stages as well. And so that's one big attraction for when you're looking for a job, when you're looking for opportunities, but also when you think of where do you want to develop your career. In my case, that was the reason why I wanted to move to London, is because I saw a path could be more diverse in terms of opportunity. I didn't know exactly which kind of real estate I wanted to work in, but I knew that whichever path I would choose, I would be able to move. Maybe if I were more interested in urban development, in finance, or in construction, that would be easier to make a change or to shift as I would go. And in terms of pace of the work, maybe that's something to mention as well. It's very fast in the sense your career can progress quite quickly at quite young age, or with the bit less experience compared to what you would have in France. You can move up the ladder, you can have a lot of responsibility. It really depends on what's your motivation and how much you want to get involved to. You have a lot of large firms, a lot of smaller firms. It's also very friendly to start your own business in the UK. So that's a number of alumni from Strasbourg, but also like from every kind of background decide to do so in the UK. I believe it's catching up in Paris, but for now I would say what I've seen in the entrepreneurial environment is very favorable here. I know they are also talking about visa, a number of visa which are specific to entrepreneurs. So some of them who are interested, they really should look at this as well. But yeah, for me, the main attraction was I saw maybe this has changed a tiny bit, but the attraction of the fast-moving job market is the main attraction for a city like London.
Thank you very much, Thierry. So flexibility, career change, and career evolution are the three key pillars of a career in the UK in comparison with other countries. And Sacha, since you are a co-founder, can you maybe share with us your own experience in building a business in the UK?
My feedback is rather limited because I'm a dual national. And so I don't have any of the issues that purely French people will have. It's very easy. As Thierry has mentioned, exceedingly so, really. Two of my partners are French, but they do it based in France. So the culture is very much encouraging, and it's quite easy to set up your own business. But once again, I'm not sure what the visa processes are and how much of an impediment that is to your goals.
Thank you. Thank you, Sacha. So there is a question in the chat from Itong Ling about any tips on job hunting for non-EU citizens having a background in international relations, security, and geopolitics. So any tips about this?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I'm not sure if it's going to be particularly focused for non-EU citizens. I think more general tips for job hunting in that sector. So LinkedIn is incredibly useful, I have to say, because you really need to start following, adding people that are in the sector you're interested in, else a lot of jobs are actually under the radar. So I found that some job platforms like Indeed or platforms like that weren't particularly useful for me because I tended to get the same results as you do. So finance and STEM. So it was lots of jobs as like an ESG analyst and stuff that didn't really quite fit the bill for me, very quantity. So I would say you need to be really active on LinkedIn to try just find people that work in organizations that you think are interesting, follow them, and then jobs will start popping up. And also that will make you more visible to recruiters. So as Thierry was saying, the market is really active and really flexible, and the recruiting industry is really, really dynamic. So for me, the way I got my job was through being spotted on LinkedIn by a few recruiters. Then they then give you a phone call, and then it kind of speeds up the process, which is great. But for that, you need to be visible on the platform. So I would recommend just get active on LinkedIn, and then you'll see more opportunities in your sector.
Thank you, Nathalie. Any other suggestions?
If I may add to this, because the question was on security and geopolitics, I think there you can be strategic. Bye, Damien. You can be strategic on picking the institution you're applying to. So if you're needing a work visa sponsor, the institution you would want to be applying to is an institution that handles that regularly, and you're not incurring any sort of significant cost on that company to sponsor your visa, because you need specialists to have that done. So I'd keep an eye on that. The smaller and more specialized you go, the more difficult, I'd say, sort of from a think tanking world perspective, they need to be quite desperate in order to start sponsoring visas. So they're sort of you can be strategic about this. Sacha looks like she's disagreeing with me.
No, not at all. I completely agree. I think my number one tip is go to the conferences, go to the events. There are so many trade shows in Paris. Eurosatory is one of the biggest ones in Europe. If you're not going there and you're saying you really want to get into defense and security, then you're not doing yourself a lot of good. It really helps if they've met you before or they know your face. So you can apply, but if you're a non-EU citizen, and it depends what kind of non-EU citizen as well, but that does go without saying, getting out there and meeting people is going to be all the more valuable, especially in this field. And then again, it completely depends on what kind of organization you want to go for. If you're going for Lockheed Martin or Airbus, that's something. BAE Systems, you are, honestly, if you're not a British citizen, good luck is all I have to say. So it's up to you to do your research, understand that certain companies are simply not going to take you, others will, and you really do need to focus on those companies, but they need to know you to some extent or have met you first, and it shows that you are proactive and passionate about what you do. But I do understand that it takes effort and time.
Thank you, Sacha. Any other recommendations, or shall we move to other topics?
Yeah, I wanted to add a bit. I don't know that sector specifically, but I would add to the recommendation on being active on social media, such as LinkedIn in particular, but all kind of social media actually. You have to be a bit of almost a stalker of finding who works in the sector, in the company you are interested in, and really not hesitating, reaching out to those people, finding the one connection you can have. It can be either you find some fellow alumni from Sciences Po, you find some common interest. Just because you're from the same nationality, you have some fellow countrymen working in the sector or the company that you are looking for. And trying to find some connection there, the first solution, maybe that person will not be in the sector, in the team that is hiring or have any knowledge of that. But often people are first genuinely want to be helpful, and they are very keen to help if you reach out politely and say, well, I'd like to have a quick 10-minute coffee, virtual coffee, because I'd like to know a bit more about the sector and what you do at that firm. And often they are also keen to recommend you if they see a job, if there is a job, or at least putting you through the HR of that company. Can be quite a big help. And that's very helpful. And usually people are quite willing to help. Shouldn't be put off if you find the one person that you think is the best contact and that person does not reply, because people are still busy and may not take the time or have the time to reply to you. So you have to expand your net. But generally that works quite well. Nowadays you have a lot of ways to connect, a lot of social medias and ways to connect. So use that to your advantage.
Thank you, Thierry. And what are your impressions about the life in the UK? What is your view about work-life balance? Any other ideas about the professional culture in the UK in comparison to the one in France?
I want to mention once, the similar to the flexibility or dynamism about the job market is generally a feeling that I usually like to mention about London. I come from Paris. Paris is a great city, it's beautiful. But after living a few years here, I still say London is more lively, even more active. There's always everything happening here. When I go to Paris, I feel like sometimes in summer it's a bit dull or not as busy as I thought it would be. And I say that as a Parisian. But generally, you have opportunity to do a lot of things that you think you had no chance to do. And I will give one example. I volunteer at the Science Museum, for example, as a tour guide and some events such as a sleepover for the kids, which is completely different from my usual day-to-day life. But I saw they had some opportunities where I'm looking for people. I applied, explaining why I was interested in Science Museum, that just need to have some interest. But generally, they are very keen to attract people from every kind of background. And this is a kind of different thing, different opportunities. It's not directly a job, but it's just what you can do in London. And I was thinking, and I was trying to look, could I do the same in Paris if I wanted to do? Not so much. I was looking at the French Museum. There is much more reluctance to take some volunteers, maybe some distrust about what volunteers can actually do, and bring on to the public or to the visitors, a bit of mistrust maybe. But at least in the UK, you have a lot of occasion to do something new, something different. And that's really something which I appreciate here.
Thank you, Thierry. Very interesting. So maybe one of the next Sciences Po alumni activities could be in the Science Museum. Could be interesting, I think.
For sure. I will send an invite for sure.
What about you, Sacha?
I don't think there's any city quite like London, from a completely non-biased perspective, of course. But I will say certain aspects of London's social life is very different. And I don't think there's anything quite like it really when it comes to social clubs. So we meet regularly at the National Liberal Club. You won't really find anything like it in Paris. I think apart from the Cercle de l'Union, and that's about it, really. So you kind of enter a new area of London society, and it's very different, but it's rather exciting.
And thank you, Natalie.
Yes, I think I can say a few positives, but also maybe a few words of caution. So in terms of the positives, going back to work-life balance, because I think you were asking about that, I'd say work-life balance is actually excellent. Bear in mind that I'm speaking from kind of an industry perspective, so I'm not in agency, I'm not in a big consultancy. I work in-house, and I was really baffled when I saw all my colleagues leaving around 5 p.m., 5:30. They do arrive earlier than in Paris, though. People usually arrive between 8 a.m. and 8:30, I would say. So they start earlier. Lunch breaks are definitely shorter than in France. Sometimes people don't have lunch breaks, which I'm a bit shocked about still. But yeah, I would say generally people maybe have a shorter lunch break, but they finish work quite early because of the commute. So there tends to be quite a long commute in London. But overall, you know, if you leave, at least in my company, if you leave at 5:30, totally fine. Everyone is leaving. People sometimes are leaving earlier. Lots of flexible work as well. So it's normal to have a few days working from home or some days working from the office. It's incredibly flexible. So that's very good. Less présentéisme in general. It's more performance-based, I think. Maybe other people would disagree, but I think in general, work is very performance-based. So you're expected to show results rather than show that you're, you know, putting in the hours, I would say. In terms of the social life, well, there's literally everything and anything you could ever wish to do in the city. However, and this is where maybe the word of caution comes in, I think when you first arrive in the city, it can be quite difficult to get to know people on a deep level because you don't see them very often because everyone's incredibly busy. So you have to schedule things a few weeks in advance, but it might also be the same in Paris. I'm not sure. So you keep having to schedule things. It's not easy to find people who live close by because London is absolutely massive. So I would say in terms of making friends, you definitely have to put in the effort and not expect that you're gonna magically make friends when you arrive. So that's why I say also it's helpful to have the Sciences Po community there, because seeing people every month, at least you can start making these connections. So London can feel a bit lonely when you first get there, but I think this is not something that lasts if you put in the effort and make the connections and get to see people regularly. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie. What about Linus' view?
I can't offer any comparison between the French and the English working culture because I've never really worked in France. I only studied there. Being a German, I can say it is that maybe that's one thing to add. Social interaction is different. It's British. It's a lot more veiled, and you have to listen very carefully to get the right vibe of what is being tried to communicate to you, which causes all sorts of problems for example, in my international PhD cohort, because a PhD student might hear that he's doing fantastic with his research, and his British supervisor is actually telling that student that things really need to change. So maybe that's another element of it. But I find it very enjoyable. I prefer that way over being too direct, but that's a personal opinion.
Thank you, Linus. I see we have a question in the chat about staff shortages in a number of sectors in the UK, especially since Brexit. So do you confirm that about these staff shortages? And maybe have you been witnessing it in your specific sector or in your specific company? And could you please tell us more about this?
Yeah, I mean, there are indeed news, and it's quite wide about staff shortage. There is in the service industry in particular, because that's where Brexit has made a big difference. European nationals cannot come easily find any job, because now they need to get sponsored before coming to the UK. So that's where you have a number of the largest shortage, and maybe that's where it's talked about here. There isn't like a list of which sectors are considered in shortage or have a specific and dedicated for this visa and requirement. But generally, there are, I speak for finance and real estate industry on my side, not shortage, but clearly a need for more talent to come. It used to be very easy, and a lot of European nationals used to come from Europe to London. The job market was very large. It may have reduced a bit because now companies are opening more branches in continental Europe, in Paris, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam in particular. But you still see the main team remaining in London and having a lot of hires still. So maybe not shortage in the sense of there's really a huge need for hiring, but you do see still a number of roles that needs to be filled.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe I can just follow up on that. I think I would pretty much agree. In my company, I think roles take quite a while to be filled. They're always filled, but it is a bit of a pain to fill them. So I think there is definitely a huge competition for talent on the market at the moment, which is also kind of good because it means you can negotiate your salary a bit more at the beginning, which I think I was seeing something about the average salary for example, UCL graduates. It has increased. The starting salaries have increased quite significantly. Well, there's also inflation, but let's not start talking about that. So I think talents are now in a position of negotiating a bit more and choosing more what the conditions that they want, because the market is a bit more in the favor of candidates, I would say.
Thank you, Natalie. Anyone else, Sacha or Linus?
I don't think there's too much of a staff shortage in defense. But as Thierry said, they are looking for certain skills, certain niche skills. They're always looking for very interesting talent, but that is not, it's not driven by a need to fill in a vacancy.
Thank you, Sacha. What about the research on higher education, Linus?
I don't have that oversight, I'm afraid. I don't think we are in a dramatic situation. I think the news that you were referring to, who was asking the question, I think that's mostly related to services. We do have problems with getting researchers from cross-continent research projects. So I know about that, but I don't think that's sort of quite the same issue.
Thank you. And in terms of cost of living, how has London changed in the last months, in the last years? We spoke a lot about inflation in the media, but in the practical daily life, or is it hard to find a flat? What are your views about the cost of living for a newcomer?
And I'm happy to start as a student, and then hopefully things get better from across the panel. No, I mean, yeah, London is very expensive. There's no way around that. I'd say in most European big cities, capitals, you will have a cheaper life. In some of them, you will be better paid. For people who are entering a job market, it is very, very common to share accommodation, so to rent a place and flat share. Salaries are going up, but so is the cost of living. In some areas, dramatically so, with our inflation being a bit more prolonged, and I think a bit higher as much as I've followed the news than in the rest of Europe, due to our idea to enter the European Union. So yes, there's no way around this, and especially for chronically underpaid or costly endeavors such as PhD research. Yeah, you've got to be willing to suffer. I hope the others have more positive views.
What about the private sector then, Thierry? What is your view?
Well, hopefully I'll try to give a bit of a brighter side. However, there's one thing which is true is, especially for young professionals, starters and graduates, the first job in London is actually very hard, and the compensation is actually surprisingly low from what I've seen for a city like London. Almost lower than in Paris, because the competition used to be extremely strong. Everyone wants a job. Everyone, like every young graduate, wants to come to London. So the competition was extremely strong. Companies were able to pick and choose, and they had the advantage on their side at this moment. So hiring a lot of young graduates and see who was performing well. However, very quickly, situation changed. I was mentioning about your career progression and chance given. After a couple of years, your situation evolved dramatically. It's become much better. Once you've managed to show what you're capable of, and if you're still relevant, then companies would want to keep you and really make the effort to promote you, increase your salary, give you a raise, really make sure that you would stay there because you're extremely valuable for the firm. So first years coming to London as your first job is probably going to be tough. From people I've seen, and even for myself, when I came to London, that was, even though I had a few years of experience before, still I never worked in the UK, so it was harder to make my case. The first year were quite difficult, but quickly you can show what you're capable of, and then progress quite well, and you're given that chance as well to evolve and progress. So hopefully after a few years, your situation is much better. And I think trajectory can be more attractive as well than in Paris in terms of responsibility, in terms of promotion and raises.
Thank you very much, Thierry. What about you, Sacha?
Is compensation sufficient to reside in London? Depends on your compensation. Depends where you choose to live, how you choose to live. Once again, it is completely dependent on what your own cost-benefit analysis of the situation is. So once again, London, it's a world capital. It is going to be expensive. How expensive is entirely dependent on your own situation.
Maybe to add to that, and to also answer the last question I see in the chat. London is brutal in terms of prices, I have to say. I arrived when inflation started to go up. So I think I started my job on the 1st of August. And then we had the Truss mini budget shortly after that. That was an interesting moment in UK history. So I would say the renting market is not easy at the moment. There's quite a lot of demand for not a lot of properties. So housing prices, renting prices are going up. So definitely that's going to be the biggest kind of share of your spending is going to go into renting. And I agree with Sacha, it depends where you live. You can definitely find areas where it's still affordable to live, but don't expect to live anywhere in central London or in nice areas, because I think that's probably a bit tricky at the beginning. Talking about a salary range, the advice that I was given when I was job hunting by a former Sciences Po student was don't start below 30K if you can in London, because it's going to be a bit tricky. 30K being gross annual salary. And I followed that advice, and I think I'm quite happy I followed it, because I think being under 30K right now in London with the cost that I have, I don't think I could manage. So that's a rough cutoff. There's someone blowing their nose, I think. That's like a cutoff recommendation I could give to you. But then also I understand it's difficult to negotiate if you are a graduate, but I'd say after Sciences Po, you can definitely ask for more than 30K, and below that would be probably a bit uncomfortable right now.
Maybe I have a little bit to contribute to that, because I think you were also the one asking the question about geopolitics and security sector. So avoid charitable work is sort of the main point. So think tanks can be as low as 25, and yes, some charities also offer jobs in the sort of range of 25 to 30K. And if you, as soon as you look into industry, more prestigious think tanks, then you look at a slightly at a better 30+ range. And I think what you would be with the 2 years experience, you should be more looking at sort of 35 at the moment with the current market. And I'm currently also looking for for jobs. That's also something that you'll easily be finding. It's not utopic. That's about why.
If I could add, I think when you're talking about salary range, especially in London, it's going to drastically differ. You could look at the salary of a civil servant. That's not going to be very much to someone working in financial services. I won't give an estimate, but it's going to be significantly higher. So it's up to what you plan to do in London and how you plan to get there. Because you could, for instance, you've mentioned security, you could be working at Airbus, and then they're transferring you to London, and that's significantly easier. You could choose to do 2 years in Paris, then transfer, or you could choose to go straight into London. It might be a bit more challenging, but that's still an option.
Thank you for your tips and clear explanations. So we have 5 minutes left. Anyone else who has particular questions, and feel free to open your camera and ask directly your question if you like. Or would you like to add something? You mentioned the point that Sciences Po was useful for your professional experience. Do you have any tips for someone coming willing to come to the UK, maybe attending a double degree or an exchange year in a UK university? What are your views on it?
I was going to say that's an excellent question. You could also consider Scotland, which might be a bit friendlier to Sciences Po. And there are other cities. I don't think there would be as many European opportunities, but Manchester, Bristol, Liverpool, and the rest are good cities with opportunities, but not as much as London. Once again, I say this as unbiased as I possibly can.
Maybe on the double degree question, Camilla, I think it is useful to have a known institution, and Sciences Po is very well known, but it is well known to people who are interested in it and who broadly are also having a background in political science or sort of a similar related degree. So it's always a nice little exercise to combine both great names such as LSE, King's. I don't know all the dual degrees Sciences Po is offering, so but it is a good way. And language-wise, it makes things easier as well, because as soon as you've got a degree in that you did in Britain, you're treated as a native speaker in most places, which helps things along sometimes.
Thank you, Linus. Any other recommendations?
Maybe about the question of outside London. I mean, a bit like in France, London is still the biggest place and where you have definitely way more opportunities. Maybe on some sectors, you may find more opportunities in other cities. If you are more into news and journalism, I believe the BBC has moved headquarters outside of London. You have a number of governmental services that have moved away from London, that may be more relevant to UK opportunities, so less relevant to European or European focus. Because otherwise, yeah, it's probably a bit like France, where most of the opportunities would still be focused in London.
Maybe continuing with that, another piece of advice, if you want to avoid London costs, but still want to work for a company that's based in London, there's a lot of flexible working. So some jobs can offer something like almost 100% working from home, but then you just commute down to the office maybe once every 2 weeks. So actually, a lot of my colleagues are based in Yorkshire, in Canterbury, in Bristol. So I think teams now are a bit more like scattered all around the UK. So you can also look into just a working from home type of job.
Definitely, it's much more flexible in terms of ways of working in the UK. I know France has this habit of going to the office much more and sometimes giving some flexibility to employees. In the UK, it's quite reversed, I would say. Most firms and most employees have the options to work at least partly from home or remotely. It's definitely much more flexible than in France.
And this, in your opinion, is due to the COVID pandemic, or was it common also before it?
I think it was a bit more common already before, and now it's become much more accepted and even used by companies on purpose to attract talent, to allow people as well to work from often it's known that people had a very long commute in London, so that reduced that commute time for either more time at home or for work, but at least giving people more flexibility. And it does allow people to live further than trying to all conglomerate in London. I have a lot of colleagues as well living quite far from London and commuting once or twice a week to the office. And companies or agencies try to be now located where it's more convenient for people to commute to this location.
Thank you, Thierry. I think we are now arrived at the closure. I give the floor to Linus, who will explain to us the next activity, which will be held on the 30th of March, and you can subscribe if you want to go to London and have a nice degustation.
You saved me because I didn't know the date anymore. Yes, so for those of you who are going to be in London very soon, next month on the 13th, my good friend and vice president of our society, Virginia, who is also in the call, organized a wine tasting at London-based French wine merchant in Westminster, and they have a lovely little cellar and Sciences Po Alumni UK is going to go down in the cellar and do a wine tasting according to the motto a Tour de France. So it's going to be quite an experience, and you can get your tickets via our platform, where you can also register. Thank you.
Thank you, Linus. And I think for those of you who would like to look for a job in London, this kind of social events, networking events organized by the alumni chapter are also an opportunity to have a sort of first view about professional opportunities and career in London. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I think this can help this kind of events. So thank you very much to our speakers, Sacha, Nathalie, Thierry, and Linus. And for those of you who are interested in knowing better and further about visa procedure, because I saw many questions about it, do not forget that on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Paris time, there will be a webinar precisely on how to get a visa to go to the UK. And for those of you who are interested in other areas of the world, we will host the next webinar, Living and Working in Latin America, on the 7th of March. So continue to follow our events. I will put the link in the chat, and you're more than welcome to join us. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you very soon, Linus, Sacha, Thierry, and Nathalie.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming.